Hello, everybody, and welcome to AP Biology for today. We are going to be looking at cladograms. Okay, cladogram shows evolutionary relationships, common ancestors, and how organisms are related or not related to each other. And then it also shows some of the derived traits that all organisms would share after a particular event where that trait is first derived. So I'm excited to share this with you. I hope you can hear me better. I have my new microphone, and we'll have a nice lesson today. Let's see. All right, so on the agenda today, you have the cladogram notes. We'll do that together. And then this training trees online is really good. If you've never used cladograms before, go on to this one. If you can beat missions 1, 2, and 3, you'll be in really good shape. If you get through 4, 5, and 6, they are very hard. So if you don't get that far, that's totally okay. But this would be really good practice to help you start getting the basics for cladograms. And it just walks you through step by step how they work, what do they do, how the genes and traits and relationships work on a cladogram or the evolutionary family tree. So I highly recommend that one. It's really good. As far as notes today, I'm in the cladograms. And the first part is just to figure out what stuff is. So a node is a split between evolutionary lines. And that means that these organisms aren't breeding together anymore. Okay, they are reproductively isolated. And there's always a two-way split. There's never three. And then the node where those lines actually split is also called the most recent common ancestor. And I just call it the common ancestor for short. So this node here is the common ancestor for D and E, and this node here is the common ancestor for all of the modern organisms. The other thing you can tell by this diagram is how old things are. This is the most ancient, and these are the organisms in modern times. So you can see how time kind of moves forward as you go up this cladogram. Sometimes they're shown left to right, where left will be the most ancient and right side will be more modern. Don't be confused by this. It's just a different notation. Okay, cladogram shows a phylogeny, how organisms are related. So this is another way that we can look to see if they're related. So in this one, group A splits off in the most ancient node, and it has evolved separately without breeding with these other ones. So it is the most distantly related group to all the rest because it split off in the most ancient times. Then this branch here in purple evolved on its own. They did not breed with part A, and it split into B and the further part. B was then isolated and didn't breed with others again. So it would be the next most distantly related. Then this evolved here on its own in orange with C splitting off. And then this evolved on its own in green. And this is the most recent split between D and E. These are the most closely related because they share the most recent common ancestor, the shortest amount of time there. On these cladograms, they don't give years or thousands of years or millions of years. They just show a relative amount of time. So it's in relation to one another. Sometimes they will put years on it, and you will see that in the homework with the primates today. But these split the most recently, so they're the most related. A split off the most distantly, the most long time ago. So it's least related to the rest of them. So you can kind of look and practice these. I invite you to pause the video and take a look at them. Which ones are most closely related? Which ones are equally closely related? Try that out, and then you can check your answers on the next slide. All right, here's the next slide. D and E are most closely related. They're most closely related to C. Now, because they split here, they're equally closely related to C. Then B is most closely related to these, because remember, it evolved together with C, D, and E through this part, which A did not. So A is not most closely related to B. Similarly, over here, you can see how they're related and not related with the nodes flipping. When you flip around the nodes, it actually is equivalent, which is the subject of slide number 6. Are any of these equivalent? They're actually all equivalent, okay? So this first one is the standard notation. And then we flipped around this node, D and E. It is the same meaning because these are equally related back to this node. Similarly here, if we flip a little bit more, which might be a little bit easier to see here, C, D, and E just flip like that. And that is also going to be just fine. This one, E is going to split off later, earlier, so it wouldn't be the same as E and D here. This one would not work. E and D split latest on this one, and then C and then B. This one would be equivalent to 2 and 1. 4 is not equivalent. Look at this branch here for E. It is longer. It goes back to a more ancient common ancestor than C and D, but it's different. Different phylogeny there. Phylogeny and cladograms and evolutionary family tree kind of all mean the same thing. It's the genetic family tree or the evolutionary family tree. All right, the most recent common ancestor is pretty important here for deciding it. Okay, in this place, we're also going to start adding derived traits. So these are traits that all of the organisms after the event will share with each other. So all these organisms have this common ancestor here. And before that, we had vertebra develop. Okay, so all these animals here, and everything after this horizontal line will have vertebra. And so this would be a group of organisms called vertebrates or vertebrates. Now, sharks do not have true bones. They only have a cartilaginous body. A bony skeleton actually developed after sharks split off. And so we'll see that derived trait here after their more recent common ancestor. So after this horizontal line, all of these organisms, not the shark, all of these organisms would have a bony skeleton. Next trait would be 4 limbs. So everything after this would have 4 limbs. Amniotic egg. Okay, this is that fluid around the developing fetus. Everything after amphibians would have that. And remember, amphibians, they have tadpoles, and then they would evolve into, then they would morph into the second body form here. So that they don't have the amniotic fluid yet. Hair developed on this line with primates and rodents. And eggs developed with a hard shell that works on land. That's developed here after crocodiles and birds split from mammals. So you can check out the questions there and see if that makes sense to you. All right, red node could be anywhere between primates and hare. Okay, that would be anywhere with a common ancestor. We don't know exactly where, unless we did have a time frame on this, which don't really have. We don't have a scale bar. And this is a problem for quite a few things because we did name them before we really understood their evolutionary relationships. And so everything in green here is reptiles, which doesn't make a lot of sense with birds splitting off on one side and mammals sharing a common ancestor with reptiles and birds. So it's It's kind of like when Pluto was a planet. It's not really. So we have a couple different ways to organize these groups, and this is where the hard vocab comes in. So make sure you learn these 3 words. So the one that makes the most sense to me is called monophyletic. So one phylogeny, all of the members in it, and one common ancestor. This is very useful to show all the organisms that have evolved from this common ancestor labeled B. Okay. So this would be called a clade. Okay, a clade, a group that includes all of the members and their common ancestor. We would also call it monophyletic. They only have one phylogeny there. It's not a mixture of any of them. This one is pretty useful for me in showing evolutionary relationships. Now, polyphyletic, poly means more than one group. So there's more than one clade here. Group E and G do not share a common ancestor unless we go farther back. And so this would be in a clade with this one, with these 3, F, G, and H. E would be in a clade with C, D, and E. And they would all be in a clade with B, but we're not including B or F or H or C or D, just these 2. Maybe we'll want to look at some trait here, some derived character that they have in common. So remember, when they don't share an ancestor with that trait, it's called convergent evolution. So this could be useful to show that trait in common, like dragonflies have wings and bats have wings, but they don't have an ancestor with wings. It evolves separately. So we would call that a polyphyletic group. And then here's another one that's not very useful. If we have an ancient ancestor and only some of the modern relatives, it doesn't have all of them, it's just these. So it's not a clade, it's not a group with ancestor and all of the relatives, it's just a subgroup. But it does include a more ancient ancestor, but not all of the descendants from that one. So not very useful. That one is called paraphyletic. Okay, para. So these are in your learning objectives, so make sure you're able to tell what they're used for and identify them as mono, poly, or paraphyletic. All right, how about this one? A group. This one is kind of tricky. Moles. I made a joke earlier today about who discovered these moles. Was it Avogadro? And I did get a few laughs in Mr. Fuller's class. Okay, so let's look at this. We have a placental North American mole, okay, placental mammal. And then we have Australian mole, marsupial. And then we have a common ancestor. So the question is this green node here common ancestor between marsupials and placentas? Yes. Would all of the traits from a mole be here? Okay, so think for yourself, would that be true or not? The answer would be no. These mole traits evolve separately in placental mammals and marsupial mammals. So that would be an example of the convergent evolution. And if we put them on the tree here, it would be polyphyletic relationship between these 2 moles. Also note that this one goes from left to right, and also with a scale bar here in millions of years. So 0 being today, 50 would be 50 million years ago, this MA, or sometimes it's MYA, million years ago. And then all the way back to 300, 350 million years before the present. Sometimes in geology, they will use before the present, BP. Usually in biology, we use MYA or MA, million years ago. Okay. So this one talks a little bit more about the ancestral character versus the shared derived character. So hinged jaws would be in bony fish and in amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. 4 walking legs only in this group here. That's called a shared derived character. Nothing outside of the group would have it. Okay. Shared ancestral character, everything in the group has it, and there might be 1 or 2 that aren't in the group that have it. For making cladograms, you're going to have to practice this a little bit. So here's the rules for that. And you could practice doing this one, which is kind of fun. And here's another practice for you. If you would like to check your answer, we can post those, or you can come check with me in class. So try that one out. It's kind of fun. You could probably also look this up. And then same with this one too. So 0, they have the trait. They don't have the trait. 1, they do have that trait. And same thing for this. 0, they don't have the trait. Plus, they would have that trait. Okay, that's it for the notes. And then for your practicing today, this one is deuterostomes. There's quite a few questions there. And then here's one with plants as well. So it does help to have a little bit of anatomy, or even just how related animal groups, the different type of phyla, a little bit of knowledge there. So deuterostomes are some ancient animals. They don't have a true digestive system. They eat and expel waste through the same opening, the deuterum. So echinoderms, starfish and the like would be there. A primitive backbone would be the notochord here. Cephalization is the first heads, where we have like eyes and a mouth. Vertebra column, okay, the bony type of vertebra. Full jaws, okay, these would be jawless fishes here, and these would be, everything else would have a jaw. Lungs, lobed fins, limbs with digits, amniotic egg, and milk. For only mammals would have milk there. That's kind of how you read this one. This would be the most ancient ancestor, most common ancestor for all of them. And this would be the common, this blue dot here, common ancestors for everything with a chordates or a backbone, or at least a notochord. The first chordates didn't have hard skeletons yet. So you can kind of look at that and work on your groups and your words and your traits. It's kind of fun. And then with the plants, this one you make your own. So start with a common ancestor. Either you start on the left and go to the right, or you can start at the bottom and go up. And so the earliest plants were mosses, and they split off from ferns. Ferns develop vascular tissue, so they can grow taller than an inch. They also would have spores. They don't really have seeds. Gymnosperms. This is a fancy anatomy term for anything with needles and cones. So these are the trees with needles and cones. And they have seeds, but they're papery thin and they're protected by a cone. Angiosperms, this is the fancy word for flowering plants. They developed most recently. And it was after the dinosaurs that they really started to take over, similar to mammals. And now 70% of the earth is covered with angiosperms, flowering and fruits and that kind of covered seed. Okay, is what angiosperm mean, a covered seed. And then cycads are kind of in between. They're like ferns in that they have vascular tissue, but they develop seeds separately, that harder seed coat instead of just pollen and, instead of just spores. So cycads kind of in between. You're going to want to show them branch off in a different way than with gymnosperms and angiosperms. Well, that one's kind of fun. All right, and then for the primates, okay, are we related to primates? Yes. Do we have a common ancestor? Does it have anything to do with being human? Not a lot. And this human branch here, actually we split off, like more recent thing is would say 7 to 9 million years ago from chimps. This one kind of shows it as 6 million years ago. It's a bit more ancient. And then humans have been evolving on their own, but the first modern humans didn't actually occur until about 200,000 years ago. So there's quite a bit missing in here, and there's a lot of other intermediate forms that are all extinct. But anyway, we do share the most recent common ancestor with chimps, and then gorillas, orangutans, gibbons, old world monkeys versus new world monkeys, tarsiers, and then here's the bush babies and lemurs as well. We have to go back 55 million years ago to have a ancestor in common with them. And so here's some of the derived traits. There is an explanation of these down here. This dentition is just when they count your teeth, the types of teeth that you would have at the dentist. So 2 would be these flat ones in the front, the incisors. 1 would be, you would have 1 canine here, that sharp one for tearing of flesh, 2 in the premolars, and 3 in the molars in the back. And you could count those on each side, and then the top and the bottom. High intramembral index, that's just comparing length of arms and legs. Thick enamel on your teeth, a fused palate inside of your mouth. And then bipedal is walking on 2 legs. Altricial young is mean they need parental care when they're young. They can't fend for themselves. So you can work on some of your traits there. Most recent common ancestors, and the phyletic groupings as well. Well, that's kind of cool. All right, get those both done by 8:20 on Monday, and I hope to see you then. Have a good day.